Welcome to Work Made Easy, where we explore the transformative power of simplicity in driving positive action and unlocking your fullest potential.
Welcome back to another episode of Work Made Easy, the podcast focused on simplifying the workplace and enhancing the employee experience. I'm your host, Parthajeet. In my work around workplace transformation, change management plays a crucial role. And a significant aspect of change management is change communication, because change is never really easy to accept. So, how do you effectively communicate change to internal stakeholders? That's what you're trying to get into today. So today I'm thrilled to welcome Sanjay Sarma, a renowned brand strategist and communication professional with over 30 years of cross-industry experience. We will get into his expertise in external communications and explore how we can apply his strategies to internal change communication. Sanjay, welcome to the show. I'm excited to learn from your experiences and discuss how we can make organizational change smoother and more relatable for employees.
Thanks, Parthajeet, and it's great to be on your show as well. It's really a pleasure.
Before we start off with the serious stuff, Sanjay, if you could describe your career in advertising and communication as a movie, which one would it be and why?
Well, interesting question, but honestly, I don't think that perfect movie has been made as yet because you do find reference points and relate to characters or situations in several iconic films, but or TV shows for that matter. But I don't think the perfect movie has been made as yet because we all are pretty unique in what we are. And I think now that you mentioned about it, it might be a good idea to script one. But having said that, I think I do see certain shades of myself or people around me in my workspace when we had been in the advertising industry. The chaos of uh, uh, how the industry was. The advertising industry, I always say, is one of the first gig industries ever before gig even became a buzzword. So if you look at movies like, say, The Wolf of Wall Street or The Big Short, The Social Network, I mean, these are films in recent times which I thought resonated pretty well with what we used to do in advertising, although many of them were about the financial industry or the media industry. But I think there were a lot of similarities in terms of how work used to happen in the heydays of advertising. But particularly, I think if as a character, I would say In Pursuit of Happiness is one film that I really uh, always kind of aligned with in some way. But
I remember the character from In Pursuit of Happiness that you spoke about. And I think like the character you've seen and done it all, right? So,
yeah, I mean, shades of it, yes. I mean, I would
yeah.
not say that I was all of it, but yeah, there was because when we joined advertising, like I said, it was almost like a gig industry because there were crazy deadlines, very casual
Mm,
work culture, chaos, very high stakes and high quality work, and you would be faced with a challenge almost by the minute, and so these setbacks, then moments of triumph, these would all, end up in a very rush that you would feel every day at your work, and that I think is something that I have not experienced or never heard of anyone experience in other industries. And
challenge.
yeah, a lot of challenges. I mean, it's an everyday
Yeah.
challenge because we didn't
Yeah.
have any set procedures, there were no processes, and you had to really find your own order within the chaos. And of course, there was a lot of post-work bonding, parties, travel, good food. So yeah, truly, it was the early days of the good life in the industry. But now the industry is completely shifted to something else. So
I'll
yeah,
I'll pick up on that on the challenge that you mentioned. Challenge every minute, like you said.
right.
In fact, change management has kind of similarities with that. I will get into that, but I'm really curious about your experience in communications and try and see how we can actually learn from that and possibly apply that, deploy that in the change management work that we do and possibly some of our listeners do. So let's dive into that a bit,
Right.
Sanjay. And like I was mentioning earlier, an inherent part of workplace change management is change communication, especially in the post-COVID world. So from your experience, Sanjay, what do you think are some key elements which make communication by itself, not necessarily change communication, but communication by itself effective during times of change?
So So we do this training program on soft skill leadership for organizations in the retail, hospitality, and other industries. And there is something that we emphasize on at the beginning of most of our training programs is that communication is fundamental to human existence. It is one of the most important tools that we use in our everyday lives, and it occupies much of our time. So even now, what we are doing is communicating, right? So
Mhm.
whether we are speaking, listening, discussing, even sending an email or a message, or chatting, commenting, or even gesturing. Everything is a part of a verbal and non-verbal communication universe. So for communication to be effective, I think more so in times of change, like you mentioned, it is essential first and foremost for us to build an environment of common understanding, which is very important. So the speaker and the listener or the group of listeners need to be on the same page. And it should be a foundation or an environment where information and ideas can be shared and exchanged freely without any hesitation or fear, and with a greater focus on listening, understanding, and empathy. Because when change happens, uh, resistance is natural, and
Right.
therefore, just speaking and broadcasting as a one-way communication doesn't work. So one has to keep a area for people to be heard as well. If they have a
Yeah.
valid point of view, the communication process, therefore, needs to have an environment of common understanding and should be a two-way process. That's very important. So you constantly build in this feedback loop and integrate it into your process. Thirdly, I think what is important is that there should be clarity and consistency. In other words, simplify comprehension for everyone. What is being said should be understood by everyone, including the last person in the room. So sometimes what happens is that uh, we look at a very templated press release, or someone else has written it and someone is speaking from that. It doesn't resonate too much because there's a certain cold vibe that you get about what is being said. It almost seems
Mhm.
like a press release. But when you speak from the heart, and when you speak to the last person in the room, then everyone in the front does understand, but the last person also feels that he's being heard, and therefore there's eye contact, there's the gestures that you do to ensure that everyone down the line to the last intern is
Yeah.
important in this whole process of change. Fourthly, I think there should be authenticity, honesty, and transparency. I think that is something which is very clear. And any communication which does not uh, sound authentic, you can make out in the first sentence itself that, this is like someone's just parroting words which are being written, and with a focus of sounding good, but not something that they mean. So particularly in change communication, I think where, like I said, initial resistance is expected, it is important that every stakeholder feels comfortable with not just what is being said, but also the location, the environment where it is being said. And here I'd like to give an example. When you're negotiating with, say, a vendor or a client, just a one-to-one, when you call a vendor to your organization and say that you want to change in the vendor agreement terms, it sounds a little intimidating to the vendor because he's in your office and you are saying it
Yeah.
from your chair of power, and the vendor is on the other side, and if he walks out, he loses the contract, and if he agrees to a negotiated rate, he would probably have to do away with a lot of his profits. But if you say that, hey, listen, we've been great partners, and why don't we just meet up for a coffee, or we meet up for lunch, and you get into a neutral environment, say a cafe or a restaurant where you actually have a meal with the vendor, understand where they're coming from, and discuss work in general, and then talk about difficulties that you're facing and why you think it is important for both of you to negotiate a change in the pattern of your terms of agreement. I think the other person would be a little more comfortable hearing you out and coming back to you with a solution. So I think
Yeah.
the location and environment therefore makes a lot of difference in what you're saying and how you're saying it. Then comes the question of who is saying it, and I think I really strongly believe that leadership teams should be communicating change rather than leaving it to a departmental head. And change communication is not a routine task. It's not an administrative task that you just tell a departmental head to convey to the entire office. It requires a lot of depth and gravitas, and I think leaders who are in control of situations and go through the whole rigmarole bring a lot of passion and emotion into the process, and can therefore embed a stronger sense of belief in everyone. So leadership, talking about communication, is always more effective than a departmental head. And in terms of how it is conveyed, I think it is important to set the context first, whether it could be an opportunity or it could be a challenge, and then lay out a vision about addressing the situation. So you need to explain why it is necessary to at this point to make a change. What are the outcomes that you're expecting? What are the, different sets of outcomes, and how these outcomes could only be achieved when all hands are on board. Everyone's collective efforts can only make it happen. So then you take the whole team together, and
Right.
you should provide some kind of an overview that connects the dots. So show how these outcomes can, for instance, benefit each and every stakeholder. How can it improve their workplace journey? How can it align with their personal goals, their ambitions, their growth trajectory? And one must also make them or caution them about any kind of short-term challenges or medium-term or long-term benefits that they can expect out of this. So it's extremely crucial to take the team along in that whole journey and make them a part of the solution rather than trust some kind of a solution on them. And lastly, I'd like to say that any communication change should be uh, from a leader. The leader should be the first one to adapt it and inform everyone about the personal steps that he or she is taking to kickstart things. So they must walk the talk. This builds a lot of trust, confidence, and it eases the whole transition process for everyone. So if it's about a salary cut, for instance, the leader should say that, okay, I don't know whether you all know about it, but I have been on a zero salary for the last 3 months. So that kind of, makes him a part of them. And therefore it makes it more achievable for others to, do their bit as well.
Right. I'm going to pick you up on that, and for a very selfish reason. The couple of things that you said. One, of
Yeah.
course, is you spoke about authenticity, and the other thing is about the leader actually kind of demonstrating that he actually is going to follow what is going to transpire within the organization. Very often we see, I wouldn't say very often, but sometimes we do see that leaders are not prepared to do the hard talk,
Right.
and they may not be seen as authentic by the people who are receiving the communication. I mean, we have certain ways of doing it. We have certain ways of preparing the leaders in these kind of cases. But Sanjay, I'd like to pick your brain. Maybe it'll help me. Maybe it'll help our listeners. How
Yeah.
do you really prepare leaders for communicating change authentically?
Yeah, I think it's firstly very important for leaders to have the right kind of advisors and mentors for themselves, uh,
Hmm.
because leaders usually live in a bubble. I think they should just
Indeed.
get out of that, and they should get out of that, yes men crew that they carry along with them, that entourage which they move on with, and they feel that the worldview of those people is the worldview that is actually out there. And I think that's very wrong. And leaders should sometime just immerse themselves into, the world of the people who they lead. And I'll just like to, since you're mentioning about it, I'd like to cite an example of how political campaigns are shaped during elections in large democracies across the world. And
Okay.
it'll connect very well. And I think by the end of it, you'll be able to figure out what I'm trying to say. Whether it's been the UK elections or the general elections in India in 2024 or in the US, you'll see that, when it's the opposition party's campaign, change is often the operating word for them. We
Hmm.
need
Yeah.
change. So every 5 years, the opposition party will drum up a campaign saying that, it's time for change everywhere in the world, in any democracy. Now, particularly when you look at the buildup of India's 2024 general elections, we saw that the leader of the ruling party, our prime minister, he used every possible media to broadcast his views through, great oratory skills and things which have worked for him for the last 5 years. And he there was not a single channel where he didn't go up and speak. But in most of the times, it remained a one-way process. The whole communication through radio, television, it was all speeches. It was almost like every speech was an election speech. So it was a very
Hmm.
predictable template. Everyone has heard what he's saying. There was nothing new in the way that the information was being shared. On the other hand, the opposition leader, who's one of the most battered and bruised character in our political scenario at the moment, uh, this man spent several years rebuilding a fractured, aging political party, and then embarked on a year-long journey crisscrossing the nation, mingling with common people, hearing them out, and highlighting the issues of the weaker sections, women, youth. Now, this was a very refreshing counter narrative, and there was something in the way that he managed to communicate change that resonated with many of the voting sections of the society. Now,
Right.
both these methods, there's nothing right or wrong in them. It's just the timing and the way that the method that was used by the latter, which showed in the election results as well. So the method and the messaging both checked the right boxes when it came to communicating change. And this same principle of what applies to political campaigns applies to organization as well.
I think one thing is very clear about elections, that in terms of the success of such a campaign, it's very easy to measure, right? It's the number of votes who wins.
Yeah.
But when it comes to organizations, Sanjay, many times people ask us that, how do you actually measure the effectiveness of your communication strategy? Any thoughts on that? Any matrices that you think we should be thinking about when measuring the success of such a campaign?
I think one of the key matrices is to look at the adoption rate, and participation is the
Mm,
best way to assess effectiveness. Whether it's when it comes to a political campaign, and you see the number of people who voted and how they voted, and look at the mood of the nation, look at exit polls, you do get a sense. Similarly, in organizations, when you've communicated some kind of change, and then you look at monitoring, what is the participation and how is the participation. So, what is the adoption rate, and the second, I think, which is important, but I don't think many people actually use it, is mood and sentiment evaluation. Are the people really happy to participate, or are they doing it just because they have no other choice, or it's being thrust on them? So that's very important to see where they are. I mean, are they really, really focused on making this change matter and happen, or are they just, doing it grudgingly and on the sly, looking for a job somewhere else? So it's important to evaluate this bit of it and look at what are the reasons possible for non-participation or dissent. There could be many reasons. Some could be professional, but some could be very personal as well. Someone might have medical issues at home, and therefore they can't leave a job, but they're still doing it. But mentally they're at a different space. So there could be many reasons. So they should be heard and they should be addressed on a case-to-case basis, but at the very early stages of this change process, not leave it for later, because by that time a lot of things will be broken.
I like the word sentiment evaluation, Sanjay. And I think earlier also you mentioned, I think, which is similar. You spoke about a feedback loop, which is very,
Loop,
very
yeah,
important.
yeah,
Now, these are very good things to keep track of how the change is being adopted. But sometimes we also see that leaders tend to ignore the feedback that they're getting and
right.
not act upon it, not draw insights from there and act upon it when the next change, project actually comes up. That's one of the problems. I mean, in your experience, Sanjay, what are some of the common pitfalls or problems in workplace communication, and how do you think we can avoid them? Because end of the day, like we wrote in our book, Work Made Easy, uh, things need to be relatable and easy to act upon. You spoke about
Right.
a message which is simple and clear. That's one of the ways. But what are some of the common problems and pitfalls do you see, Sanjay?
Uh, I would say one of the most significant to my mind is about how change is communicated. I mean, the how of it, which is the framing.
Mm,
And framing is very crucial. And we learn about framing more and more because of some of the work that we do on the social legal side of some of our clients that we work with in Europe. And I think framing is extremely crucial in terms of how it shapes messages and how they are perceived and understood. The way information is presented can significantly influence reactions. So context setting, articulation, language, tone, empathy, all of them can have a very, very big impact on how people respond to that message. And often in workplace changes, we see that the change is being communicated by the HR teams, who may not always be the most effective communicators. They might be good at
true.
HR, but they might not be good communicators. So the impact of change when it is deeply personal for people or employees, yet the communication surrounding it is often very impersonal, and I think that's where there's a big gap. And it must flow directly from the leadership to ensure that it carries the necessary weight and personal touch. And the framing and context of it should be in such a way that the person can relate to it instantly and get immersed into it. Another common issue that is separating what I feel is crucial is separating internal and external communication strategies. So when there is a change in an organization, you would notice that the organization employs a public relations firm to write out a very extensive note on what would go to the media and publications about, how this change is being affected. But when it comes to the internal communication, they leave it to the HR teams. So, to my mind,
They've begun to hire people like us nowadays, Sanjay.
they
So there's
should,
been
they
a change.
should. Yeah, that
Yeah.
change is essential because HR teams should be very tightly integrated with PR teams to devise optimal messaging and methods for internal communication. This can not only ease implementation, but it also improves the effectiveness of the whole process, and it
Right.
allows for a very close monitoring and measurement program. Uh, so that's important. And if the change is happening, I think it's good. But I think the pace of change is very slow because people still have these silos of, okay, this is the PR team, this is the HR team, this is the finance team, this is the operations team, this is the admin team. Now, there are interlinkages everywhere, and we don't like look out for each other's special, expertise uh, at the point when it is the most crucial and when it is most required. And that's a pity because people only work within their framework, and they don't want to go out of that just because they have not been told to do so. So
Yeah.
that's important. And feedback channels I've already talked about. Everyone should
Right.
feel heard. Every piece of feedback should be promptly addressed and acted upon. I think that's what you also mentioned, that we get feedback but we don't do anything about it. The fact
Yeah.
that feedback needs to be addressed within 24 hours is something which is so crucial today, and it's so doable today with technology. I don't know why people don't do it. So yeah,
Technology. Okay. So now there's always this I won't say a contradiction, but a clash between technology and I think a word that you used probably about 3 or 4 times over the last 3 minutes, which is empathy. When
empathy.
you
Yeah,
say, yeah, communication has to be empathetic, you say that communication has to be personal, and then
right,
technology comes in, and there are new ways of technologically communicating change. The
correct.
common understanding of empathy is that you kind of personalize, the human being actually communicates that. So with technology coming in, Sanjay, does it actually make communication more complex, or you think it's become easier?
I think both ways. I think firstly, it is very important to integrate technology into your workspace and work day. You cannot
Mm,
do without it. It plays a very, very crucial role today in almost everything that we do. Like today, you're sitting in one city, I'm sitting in another city, but we are just talking as if we are across the table, right? So it provides accessibility through a variety of communication modes. You can use tools like video conferencing, messaging apps, or collaborative platforms, be it Slack, Airtable, whatever you use within your organization, and that enables seamless and diverse interactions within the organization. Now, it also allows us real-time feedback and analysis, so which means that constantly, so if I'm talking and something is not working, you can use technology to fix it, right? So it
right.
makes it easier to gauge the effectiveness of the communication effort. And one can necessarily make adjustments promptly. So, but one thing that we must keep in mind is that we should only use technology as an aid to foster human connections. It should not be a replacement. Mostly people just send a WhatsApp message or an email and say that, oh, I've done my bit. What misses, what the message misses is the emotional impact. The emotional connect that you're trying to build.
Right. Yeah,
So
exactly.
if you put the entire thing in an email message and say that, okay, fine, you need to comply by tomorrow, and yes or no or whatever, and please reach out to HR to say to give your response. More than that, if you say that, hey, listen, this is what we are planning, this is what we should be doing, and this is why the change is required, and this is what we feel that we can do it together. How about having a group discussion on this or a town hall, this weekend to assess this further? So that brings in everyone into the fold and makes everyone a part of the process. So there's a certain, connect that you're establishing. So the human interaction is not missing. You're using technology to call for a human interaction subsequently, right? So use it as an aid. Don't use it as a replacement for human connections. Uh, and the emotional impact of change communication is so significant, Partha, that human interactions are always essential for addressing these. You cannot deny that. So you can't just use
I agree.
technology to like sack 200 people over a call or something. It doesn't work. So technology should complement rather than replace personal engagement in the workplace, and I think that's what is key.
Yeah, you spoke about sacking 200 people. Now, like you mentioned earlier, Sanjay, the external communication for that, the PR communication may be very different. The internal communication is likely to be very different.
Right.
Now, the danger with digital communication is that, and you mentioned like something like a WhatsApp or something like that, and you read something in the newspaper, and you make your own version of that. Your brain plays tricks on your head, and you kind of forward something that you read in the newspaper, adding your own masala on top of it. And this way, misinformation can spread very, very rapidly. And this is very, very dangerous, right, in organizations.
Yeah.
Now, I was just trying to kind of pick your brain on how do you manage and mitigate, impact of rumors and false information within an organization during a change process or during something which is unexpected, which is happening, and then they quickly have to communicate that empathetically and personally, like you mentioned earlier.
Right. So I think that's the flip side of technology. So the wrong
Yeah.
side of technology is misinformation for everyone.
Mm.
But Parthajeet, I feel that every narrative always has two sides. It will always have two sides. So you cannot really do anything about the spread of misinformation because it often reflects the other perspective, which may not be correct, but there is always the other side of it. So the spread of misinformation often reflects which perspective we choose to feed into. So sometimes you might find something coming from a policy perspective or a government information coming in, but it might have some data points which are actually subtle misinformation because it's hiding more than what it is saying. It happens worldwide because people who are in control are the ones who write the narrative. So there could be misinformation hidden behind the information, which factually might be correct. I mean, there might be no misinformation as you read the text or as you listen to someone, but what is being hidden and not being said could be the misinformation which someone else picks up and amplifies. So there are always two sides of a narrative, and the spread of misinformation is again, like I said, reflective of which perspective you choose to feed into. Uh, Now, there are no definitive answers, I think, to completely eliminate misinformation in today's world, but there is always a way to manage and mitigate it. You can't eliminate it, and
Mm.
firstly, you have to always have a very swift, clear, and consistent communication channel within your organization. This includes both formal channels, like whether you use meetings, the conferences that you do, or emails, or newsletters, or whatever that you do, or also things like informal channels. Now, we have actually stopped giving importance to what we used to call the grapevine in an organization. Now, the grapevine, to my mind, tells you more than what the formal channels of communication do in an organization.
Indeed, completely agree.
So the informal channels are what you need to listen to more carefully. The chats, the coffee machine conversations, the cafeteria conversations, or the Reddit or the Quora forums or the social media, anonymous things that are being said about you. I think you should, as a leader or a leadership team, constantly make notes of what is being talked about you in these informal channels and then address them head on. So
Hmm.
regular updates that help you ensure that the accurate information is promptly disseminated is important. You need to address these rumors. Now, misinformation will always show up. It's an everyday affair. It puts its head up. You just tackle it head on. You acknowledge the false information and provide more factual counterpoints. I mean, this would show that your organization is attentive to whatever is being said and is committed to, you know, a fair bit of transparency that, okay, we are upfront about it. Fine. We might have done something which is not to everyone's liking, or, our performance might not have been the way that we had imagined, but we are transparent about it, and we are taking steps to move in the right direction. So this, I think, is something which also comes from what I talked about in my, I think, the first or second question, which you framed, which is
Right.
about fostering an
Yeah.
environment where employees feel comfortable seeking clarification. So an open door policy where people can actually come up and ask that, hey, I heard that, this is going to happen to our organization, or we are being merged into another organization, and some people might lose their job. Is that so? Now, the moment someone can clarify this and someone gets a response directly, it just helps mitigate the spread of that information further. So, encouraging open dialogue through question answer sessions, or through any kind of verbal or written feedback mechanisms, or even anonymous reporting channels. This allows employees to voice their concerns and get more accurate information. And I think finally, I would say that leadership needs to be involved in this. The leadership cannot leave it to the organizational teams or departments to take care of this problem. They need to be actively engaged and willing to communicate about the credibility of the information that is being shared. And they need to, so it can't be that, okay, any newspaper is getting back to you asking for a clarification, but, we got no comments from the company. That should not happen. They should be direct in terms of their response, or they could say that we are working on a response and we'll get back to you within the next 24 hours. So that shows that there is a process that's happening.
Yeah, you spoke about leaders, Sanjay, and many a times we end up having these discussions with leaders to emphasize the importance of effective change communication. It's not an easy task.
Yeah.
And this conversation that we've had, I think, will help us, help a lot of people to understand what change communication is all about and why it is important within organizations. We've spoken. I could go on and on. I've got 200 more questions in my head. But Sanjay, I also have difficulty in explaining what kind of professional work I do to my family. If you
Right.
had to explain communication, change communication to, let's say, a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old, how would you do it, Sanjay?
A good question. I think a 5-year-old. Well, I think some of the learning models that are made for children are actually good at explaining change communication. So I think we can use certain tools like building blocks, or we can use
Yeah.
tools like so take building blocks, for instance. I mean, you and a kid together, you're building a Lego city, and you put in some cars, you put in people, you put in buildings, and then suddenly you say, oh, the city is under siege. It's under attack. The enemy is approaching, and we need to save our city. So what does the kid do? You tell the kid to build a strong defense very quickly. So let's not build any more cars. Let's build a tank instead. Let's not put more people. Let's make them foot soldiers. Give them a few guns and put them on the front line, because we need to. So you change the narrative of the story so quickly that you start using the same pieces to build something different. So you along the way help the kid find the right pieces to build the blocks and protect the city that you made so lovingly. So I think it's all about working together to make something new and exciting. And I think a kid can only use a metaphor of a Lego or even a Barbie or any kind of game that they use to where there is a lot of change happening within the game itself. So you can dress up a Barbie for being at home, watching TV, or being in the kitchen, or going out for an evening party. So depends on how you manage your storytelling around it, that you can quickly tell the 5-year-old or a 6-year-old to look at how they can change quickly to adapt to the new situation.
I like the way you think, Sanjay. I think, I mean, truly, and I think your insights have been truly valuable, and I'm sure our listeners will find them very useful as they navigate their own workplace changes. Sanjay, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on this show today.
Thank you so much, Parthajeet. Thank you so much. It's really been an honor, and I hope to connect with you soon, personally as well, whenever you're in town.
Likewise, yeah. And to all our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Work Made Easy. Do not forget to subscribe and share your thoughts with us. Until next time, keep making things easy.
Work Made Easy. The transformative power of simplicity in driving positive action and unlocking your fullest potential.